Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about the things we are thankful for in honor of upcoming Thanksgiving.
That's
So,
right.
for me, this is kind of a fun one because as I reflect back over the past, I don't know, year and a half, it's been a really interesting journey, I think. Lots of things outside of the norm, things that have been very heavy, both, in terms of how people are treating each other when they're overextended, the clash of political titans, COVID, all of those things I think can be very overwhelming. And I think in situations like that, especially if you experience overextension yourself, it is very easy to get stuck in the things that you wish were different about your life. And as much as we talk about dreaming and what your life would be like if you could script it and that sort of thing, I think sometimes when you build out that dream and then you think about how maybe far away that seems, it can be somewhat
Right.
disheartening if you don't have a plan to actively get there. So, what we want to talk about today is gratitude, really looking at the things that we have experienced over the past year and a half. And Eric and I are hoping that in this episode, you get to see a glimpse into our own lives. And we're going to do our best to be truly authentic, I think, about the things that have gotten us through or that we have really focused on finding joy, right? Over the
Right.
past 18 months. So we'll kind of maybe bounce back and forth. I think that for me, if I look at it, there's a couple of things, and I'll start with even my relationship with my spouse. We definitely, in the earlier years of our marriage, have some ups and downs. And I can remember a friend of ours saying that most people's relationships end the way ours began, very, very drama fueled, I think. Lots of intense arguments, that sort of thing. And because we have spent a fair amount of time working on our relationship and learning how to, have fights without fighting, make them more conversational and productive, we've had some different outcomes. And Mike and I have been together for a long time, married for 15 years, together for 18. And the thing that I think is really interesting in that context is that when you live with somebody for that long, it's easy to believe that you know them. And the fact of the matter is that we all change and we all evolve. And I feel like over the past 18 months, I've had the opportunity to get to know my spouse all over again because life went from being kind of crazy and feeling like just a ping pong ball from thing to thing to the activity to,
It's
birthday party to
frenetic, right?
sports to, yeah, that sort of frenetic area to, hey, we're all stuck in this house together. So, where's that going? And at least for us, and I know not everybody has had this same experience, I think that sort of relearning of one another has been really good. And in 15 years of marriage, I would say that this year is probably the first year that we are on the same page financially. And that is, that's hard to say out loud because I help people get on the same page with their finances all day long and have for about as long as Mike and I have been married. Um, but we finally have kind of created a cohesive vision for ourselves and for our family and gotten on the same page with it. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. And I also feel very fortunate because the amount of effort that we put into really being there for each other during the months that we were at home and not really going anywhere, I think has created a situation for us where we're stronger now than we were going into it. And there's an even deeper appreciation for what each of us brings into the marriage. So I would say for me, that's probably the thing that I am most grateful for um, over the past 18 months.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so easy when you're just in the rut of life, and ruts are good. I think ruts are usually actually
Routine,
a
routine.
routine is probably a positive thing, right? It helps you to sort of, okay, this is what we do, right? And when it gets disrupted, I think you can go through a couple of variations on that theme. Is well, that's disrupted. What else should I disrupt? Because we're disrupting something, I'm going to disrupt everything. And so I think part of that gratefulness, I think for us too, is, all right, hey, everything got disrupted, and we didn't just throw everything out and like, well, screw it all, we're done. Let's just wreck everything, right? Because I think there's a fair amount of people that is their is their reality.
I know many people that have done that.
Right. And it's, I'm quitting this job, I'm quitting this person, I'm changing this, I'm changing that. And I think part of it is that lever of, I have something I can control in a situation that feels out of control, and you're pulling a lever that you can't unpull. And a lot of times, right? If you're quitting jobs and quitting people, sometimes you can't put that toothpaste back in that tube, right? that is you can't unpull that lever. And so I think part of our gratefulness for that is kind of a little bit of what you talked about is, all right, we hunkered down, we did the stuff, we made it through. We looked at their priorities, like, okay, we used to do all of these things. Which of these do we add back in when life returns back to normal? Which do we go, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. That wasn't serving us, right? So I think that's definitely the part of for us, some of the good things that happened.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that's happened is I've gotten to know my kids better. Prior to the shutdown, my kids spent more time with other people than they did with me on a weekly basis because of school and athletics and all of that. And so I would get, whatever they chose to share with me at the end of the day,
right?
Which is not always a whole lot. How was your day? Fine. Who did you talk to? My friends.
Nobody.
Right. That's all you get. And then, when you're home for a long period of time, your kids spend more time talking to you. And I think with my kids, and I'm gonna speak to the financial side of things, just because this is a financial podcast, right?
Right.
But my son is about to turn 7, and he just went with his grandparents to Target, and they gave him a budget and told him he could buy whatever he wanted as long as he stayed within that budget. And when they came back from Target, he had a bag full of stuff, and it wasn't that it was some crazy amount of money that was spent on these presents, but my mom and my dad were both saying how impressed they were that he could do the math in his head. So as he was picking out different toys, he was adding, okay, well, here's what that plus this would be. So that means I have X number of dollars left. And then he would, add a new toy in and then look at it and make sure those were the best toys that he wanted the most. And then he would take a toy out and put something else in. And I think they spent over an hour in the toy aisle at Target, which says a lot about
their mental fortitude.
Yeah.
You've got 10 minutes.
But,
we got to go.
Yeah, but I think for me, what was really neat is that, Connor is my, I would describe Connor as a pack animal. He is really, he's really smart, but he's quietly smart. Whereas his sister's more like me. She's smart and she wants you to know it. So, sometimes I think Connor is just kind of quietly doing his thing, and getting to see his ability with money in particular to prioritize what he actually wants within a budget, to me says like, hey, we're on a good path. And he's learning to think in terms of, okay, if I only have so much, what do I actually want to spend it on? And that to me is a skill that, I don't know, many of the adults we talk to don't have yet. So to see that blossoming in my 6-year-old, soon to be 7-year-old, was really kind of a neat experience. And getting to see that through his grandparents' eyes was also really cool. And so I'm grateful that he is where he is with that. Part of that is, we make them do the addition and the subtraction when they're spending their allowance and that sort of thing. But to see him do it kind of on his own with other people says that the foundations that we're laying are taking, and that we're being really deliberate, and our kids are responding to that. And then I'll add Emily into this one too. So we fund a whole life insurance policy for her college planning, and right now it has probably, I don't know, maybe 60 grand in it, and she's 10. And I think we should be at like 70 to 75,000 in the next 2 years. And it was interesting because we've been teaching her the same things that we teach our clients, which is that she can borrow against the policy and she can look at purchasing an asset that produces cash flow, which in this case is, we told her to start looking at short-term vacation rentals. And so she's actively looking so that she can get a feel for where in the country she wants to acquire property. And what has been really neat for me is that I would never have assumed that a 10-year-old would really be interested in having those conversations, but she's connecting the dots on her own. And this past weekend, she brought it up and said, listen, I have some questions about how this is going to work. If I buy a property and the property produces income, I know that the income has to go to replenishing the loan that I took against my policy first. But after that loan is paid back, what do I do with the money? She's like, obviously, I want to save like 80% of it or most of it. But when I get ready to buy a car, if there's enough income coming from my properties, can I use some of that money to buy the car and pay the car payment and to pay the insurance for the car? And I said, sure. And she was like, well, what if I want, this really fancy car? And I was like, well, it means that you have less money going back into your pool of assets, which means you have less money to buy another property, when that other property is then what is going to increase your income. So there's a balance between what you spend and then what gets reinvested to produce more income for you. And she kind of like it clicked and she goes, so rather than buying an expensive car that has really expensive insurance, it makes more sense to buy a less expensive car with less expensive insurance, because then I can build my money faster and buy another piece of property that will produce more income. And then I'll have more income. So if a couple years later I want a nicer car, I'll have the ability to do that. And I was like, oh, like you're grasping this more than some of the adults I know. And she kind of looked at me and she gave me this little smirk and she goes, none of my friends know how to do this. And I'm like, no, they don't. And she goes, do their parents? And I said, it depends on if they're my clients or not. And she kind of giggled and she was like, I don't think most of my friends' parents are doing this either. And I said, listen, girl, what we're trying to do is build you a completely different life so that by the time you graduate from college, because that's mandatory in our house, and you have your degree, if you've acquired several properties, I mean, our goal is to get you to a place where you can have a 6-figure income, regardless of how you're spending your time. And while right now, technically, I own these assets, my goal is one day to give them to you when I can see that you're pursuing something that is purposeful and meaningful to you. But I want you to have choices that I didn't have. And what's really cool to me is that she gets it. Right. And I know Connor will get to the point where he does too, because I didn't really start having the in-depth, like this depth of conversation with Emily until the past year or so. But how cool is it that a 10-year-old gets it? Right. And that she's doing that. And it just, I don't know, I feel so grateful for that, because she really is going to have a different life than most of the people I talk to, because she's going to have all those foundations from the very beginning. And that to me, like, I feel good about that,
Yeah. No, it's exciting, right? It's exciting to see it happening.
Yeah.
For me, on that side, from a kid standpoint, I think I had a realization, a revelation last week, 2 weeks ago. And most days my wife always kind of jokes at me that I'm not sure you can tie your shoes. Like, how do you walk out the house every morning as a
I think you have
adult,
said
right?
that in the past 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah, I know.
Poor Amy.
But I mean, no, she's amazing. And she's probably right. Like, I'm not sure I'm able to tie my shoes.
I
most days,
100% agree that Amy is amazing.
But most days you're like, man, I'm not doing a very good job as a dad. You always see the stuff that you're not doing well versus the moments you're doing good. And I remember we're going to church the other day, and a buddy of mine says, hey, your son did the prayer this morning in his Bible class. I'm like, oh, cool. How did it go? He's like, hey, he did a great job. And so afterwards, I asked my son, I'm like, well, how did it go? My oldest is named William. Said, how did it go? And he's like, well, I don't know. I didn't know how to say a prayer. I'm like, well, first of all, you didn't know how to say a prayer yet. Like, that there's always you're not a genius yet, you're not rich yet, you're not amazing yet, you're not whatever yet, right? You've got the ability to go do it. And I said, well, so how did you do it? He says, well, Mr. Jim was there and he kind of walked me through it and said, all right, here, structure it this way, think about these things, talk about these things, these are really good, right? And then I just he walked me through it and I knocked it out, right? I'm like, well, this is cool. And it reminded me, I was like, well, first of all, my kids are learning some cool stuff, and whether they're amazing at stuff or not, they will be, and they have the ability to be. But second, I was like, as a dad, maybe at first I thought, well, I'm not doing a very good job. I should have walked him through all of those nuances of how to lead a prayer, right? And I thought, no, I did a better job than that, because I surrounded him with a bunch of other cool people that are really, really amazing people, and they're all watching out for him. And so it sort of reminded me that the community that we have around our kids is a pretty cool community, and that they all have our kid, well, they have all the kids' best interests, but they're really just excellent people, and they're looking out for them and working to, even when I'm not in the room, make them better humans. And it's kind of cool, and it's not a shot that I should have been doing it all, but I did it all because I surrounded it with all those cool people. Which is kind of neat. And it sort of reminded me of kind of what has become sort of my mantra, sort of at the end of COVID, and realizing that I need to turn off the bloody news. There's a passage from Philippians 4. It says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely and admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And it reminded me that I think a lot of times we get sort of sucked into the crap of life because it's exciting, and it's fun to look at the crap and the train wreck and the whatever. But I think one of those things that we get to kind of see, and that I'm grateful for, is like, we have the ability to turn off the news, and to turn off Facebook, and to turn off Instagram, and turn off all the crap, and refocus on the stuff that's
on what matters.
Well, the stuff that matters, and the stuff that will matter for long after we're gone.
Right.
Because I may be in this job for the next 40 years, and I may not, but I'm going to have those kids for as long as I will be here forever. I know you'll hunt me down even from the grave, right? But like this thing will pass away, and will grow and change, and everything will grow and change. Right. But those kids and the impact on them is generational. And so if I can focus on pouring into them, just like you're doing with yours, that's an impact that's well beyond my years, which is kind of cool.
Well, I think that even speaks to the job itself, right? It's about pouring into other people so that they have freedom of time, right? And that enables them to then pour into their family. I know for me, in times of overextension, overextended periods, right? If you're stressed out and unhappy, it's really hard to be a good, intentional, loving parent.
Yeah.
And so I think that speaks to the beauty of the work that we're doing with the families that we work with, because it really is about how do you relieve all of the financial pressure and free up time so that they can spend more time with their families and loving on their kids and changing the trajectory of the future generations. I mean, I think you nailed it with that, right? And I don't know. I mean, this job is a hard job, right? Because you're dealing with probably one of the most emotional topics on the planet, which is money.
Right.
And people like to think it's just math and data and spreadsheets, but the fact of the matter is that human behavior in general is motivated by emotion. That's the primary driver. And then logic comes up and kind of cleans up the mess, or makes it worse in some cases, behind emotion. But I think that ability to change the course of the future through intentional, deliberate conversation, to me, right? Whether that has to do with the moral aspects, the moral, ethical aspects of what your kids are doing, or the financial aspects of all of that. To me, those are all really interconnected. And, and I got to add this on. So I went, Mike planned a surprise date this weekend, and we were eating dinner, and the table next to us was talking about money. And it was two younger couples, and I was sitting there kind of listening, and Mike was like, don't get involved. don't get involved in their conversation. Just
That's right.
let them be stupid kids. Like,
Right.
but it was interesting because they were talking about money and specifically brought up the quote that love of money is the root of all evil.
Right.
And right. And I think like idolizing money definitely creates problems. There is no one who's going to argue that. But I just started saying, oh, the love of hammers is the root of all evil. And it just sounds so ridiculous when you say it like that.
Right.
I think idolizing anything
Yeah.
is problematic, but understanding that money really is just a tool and that it is meant to help you design a life that you can be excited about and proud to say that you lived, that is the whole purpose of money,
Right.
right? I'm gonna add one thing in here just because I think it makes sense to add it at this point. One of the major changes in paradigm shift that I've had over the past year that I think is changing the way I interact with each member of my family and with the clients that I'm serving, is actually, I think, something that was almost a throwaway comment in a podcast that Justin Donald was doing. Justin Donald wrote The Lifestyle Investor. And he was talking about how he was interacting with his daughter, and specifically that their focus is progress, not perfection.
Right.
And I think that's the one thing that has probably shifted in my own paradigm over the past year and enabled me not to focus on what I don't have yet or where I wish I was, but instead to be grateful for where I am while being very intentional and deliberate about what steps I need to take in order to move into the future in a direction that I can be proud of. And it's changed the way I parent. It's changed the way I interact with my spouse. And I think it is a paradigm that I keep moving towards, and then maybe even it slips a little because I've been a perfectionist for a very long time, and letting go of old habits is hard.
Right.
But I am incredibly grateful for that one phrase, progress, not perfection, because I
Right.
think it gives all of us the grace that we need to live in so that we can be joyful in the moment and still be deliberate about what we're creating for the future without
Well,
holding ourselves to an impossible standard. So that
well, it's
those are
that
the
phrase
things that have
yet.
been,
It's the word yet, right?
yes,
Just add the word yet to
correct,
the end of everything you're going to talk about in your head, right?
right. So if
Because
you're
you're
not
your own
there
worst enemy,
yet,
right?
yeah, if you're not there yet, I think maybe spend some time thinking about what's good about your current situation and then how you maybe would change that in the coming year.
Yeah.
And I think right now is the right time to be thinking about that as we're spending time with family and extending grace into those relationships and really focusing on how we can contribute in a way that makes the world better. Right. And I think you
Yeah.
can only do that if you are coming from a place of gratitude.
Yeah. Because you've already gone through so much, and you're not dead yet.
Right.
So keep going.
So with that being said, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
We hope you have a
Thanksgiving.
wonderful holiday and enjoy your family. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.